Good morning, everyone. Here's your Mormon news update for August 1st, 2025. Today, we're going to start off with some weird Mormon shit I didn't previously know about. From an 1846 Nauvoo temple record, Brigham Young laid hands on Heber C. Kimball and ordained him to the Godhead, and that he would act as the savior to a world or worlds. This was part of a long prayer. Promised wives, seed without number, be full partaker with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The Godhead was a different blessing from Godhood. Some received only Godhood. Heber C. Kimball then did the same to Brigham Young, ordained him to the Godhead. They in turn did it by proxy for Joseph and Hyrum Smith. Other saints, W. Phelps, were blessed to act in trinities or presidencies of worlds. When I was an active believing Mormon, I had such an incomplete and idealized view of early Mormonism. I've said this before, but I thought that Joseph and Brigham were altruistic, kind men who just wanted to follow God. I really couldn't have been more wrong. They were constantly using their influence to extract money from their followers, to coerce women and girls into marrying them, and also, it seems, to have themselves ordained as future gods and saviors. Now let's go to Radio West for a heads up about an interview that aired yesterday that you might want to listen to. The description says, in 1974, a group of students organized a new project to discuss what Mormonism meant to them, a magazine called Sunstone. The magazine's goal was to raise the questions, pursue the discussions, and bear the witness worthy of a living faith that is both intellectually vigorous and spiritually discerning. The mid-1970s was a time when new independent Mormon organizations were starting up. Organizers wanted to create intellectual spaces where members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints could think critically about their faith and reconcile that with their tradition. Sunstone started as a magazine where these conversations could be more accessible to everyone. But in 1991, the church issued a statement against the group's symposia, drawing a line in the sand against intellectual expression. Today, we mark the 50th anniversary of Sunstone, a publication critical to the intellectual history of the LDS Church. Guests on the interview are Taylor Petrie, professor of religion at Kalamazoo College, and Lindsay Hansen Park, executive director of the Sunstone Education Foundation. The link will be in the show notes. Now let's go to the church newsroom, where it says, the topics and questions section of the Gospel Library app and churchofjesuschrist.org has 3 new pages with the details on the Book of Mormon translation, the character of Joseph Smith, and the practice of plural marriage. Each page provides information in an easy-to-understand Q&A format. Notice that it says it provides information, but does not specify that the information is good or factual. I know that's nitpicking, but I just thought it was funny. It goes on to say, Book of Mormon translation. The Book of Mormon came to us through a series of miraculous events, this page says. It is the translation of an ancient record engraven on plates that was preserved for centuries and entrusted to Joseph Smith by an angel named Moroni. The translation was accomplished not using traditional methods, but by divine revelation. This is ultimately so ridiculous. When I was an active member, the popular image of the Book of Mormon's translation was that of Joseph Smith poring over the golden plates, translating the reformed Egyptian characters with the aid of the Urim and Thummim. And now, official church-produced essays clarify that the actual process was quite different. Most of the Book of Mormon was translated by Joseph Smith placing a single seer stone, often one he had found previously, into a hat to block out ambient light. He would then look into the stone where he would see the English words appear, and he would dictate them to a scribe. According to multiple witnesses, Joseph often did not have the golden plates in the room and did not even look at them during the dictation process. The plates were simply a physical artifact that signaled the origin of the revealed text. If someone had told me that even 10 years ago, I would have discounted it as anti-Mormon rhetoric. Back to the article from the Church News. It says, Joseph Smith's character. This resource teaches that God has always worked through imperfect servants to accomplish his work, raising them up and strengthening them as they do his will. This was certainly true of Joseph Smith. Joseph was imperfect and prayed for forgiveness when he fell short. This is wildly convenient for the Mormon Church. When members are told that the prophet is both a divine conduit and an imperfect man, they are left with no clear criteria for distinguishing between a perfect message from God and a flawed opinion from the prophet. This creates a state of constant ambiguity. Is this instruction from God or from the prophet? The claim of being an imperfect man can also be used to deflect criticism and avoid accountability for actions, teachings, or prophecies that are later proven to be wrong, inconsistent, or morally questionable. For example, Joseph Smith's prophetic and personal life often intertwined. When challenges arose over controversial practices like polygamy, certain business dealings, or failed prophecies, the claim of being an imperfect man could be used to shield him from full responsibility, while his divine authority was still maintained for other doctrines. This allows the leader to claim divine inspiration when it is convenient, but use human imperfection as an also convenient escape hatch. Back to the Church News. The next topic is plural marriage. The Bible and the Book of Mormon teach that monogamy is God's standard for marriage unless he declares otherwise. Well, that just leaves the door wide open. Sometimes this is so comical to me. It goes on to say, so begins this page, which answers questions about the practice of plural marriage, a principle the church taught from the early 1840s to about 1890 in response to a revelation given to the prophet Joseph Smith. I have to interject. The church still teaches and practices polygamy. It's even outlined in the church's general handbook. From 38.4.1, it says, Men, if a husband and wife have been sealed and the wife dies, the man may be sealed to another woman if she is not already sealed to another man. And if you want to see this happening today, the prophet of the Mormon Church and his first counselor are both sealed to multiple women and believe that both women will be their plural wives for eternity. Since these additions have been made to the church website, I am sure there are other podcasts that go into greater detail. I just wanted to give a brief overview and let y'all know that additions have been made. Now let's go to AZ Central, where it says, in a unanimous decision, an Arizona appeals court reversed a Superior Court judge's ruling that said a bishop in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints had no duty to report allegations of SA to law enforcement. The appeals court ruled that a civil suit against the church filed by the victims of the father can go forward, citing the unique circumstances of the father's confession to his bishop. A spokesperson for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints said it intended to appeal the decision to the Arizona Supreme Court. That appeal would likely stay the proceedings. If the church really abhors abuse as much as they claim and believes in supporting victims and doing everything they can to help them heal, they would not be trying to get out of paying damages in this situation, period. Back to the article. The father confessed to his bishop in 2011 that he had SA'd one of his daughters, court documents show. The bishop then asked the man's wife to join them, and the man told her he had abused their daughter, court documents show. The bishop encouraged the man to turn himself in, or alternatively have his wife turn him in, but the court record shows he did not feel he could call the authorities himself. That bishop thought he couldn't inform law enforcement because what the father told him was a confession, one of the statutory exemptions to the law that mandates certain people have a duty to report such abuse. The church excommunicated the father from the Mormon Church in 2013, a process during which he discussed his actions at a hearing. Still, the documents show no one from the church alerted police or the state's child protection agency. Cut to the church's website. The first responsibility of church leaders is to help those who have been abused and to protect those who may be vulnerable to future abuse. I call bullshit. The first responsibility of church leaders is always to protect the good name of the church. Back to the article. 3 of the father's 6 children, 2 daughters and a son, filed a civil suit in 2020 against the church, saying it shouldered a share of blame for years of continued SA and exploitation. A judge in Cochise County ended that lawsuit in November 2023, granting summary judgment in favor of the church. The appeals court ruled on July 29th that the decision was erroneous. The 3-judge panel ruled that when the father admitted the abuse to his wife, the bishop was merely observing the interaction, not taking a confession. The judges said that a jury might conclude that the exemption to the law did not apply in that circumstance. The panel also said that a juror might find that the father's confession before the panel, considering his excommunication, also wasn't privileged. The judges in their decision said that non-clergy members were also part of that meeting. The judges also cited a portion of a Handbook of Mormon Church doctrine that says a bishop should disclose information to authorities to prevent life-threatening harm or serious injury. In such cases, the duty to protect others is more important than the duty of confidentiality, reads the handbook as quoted in the judge's decision. The decision ordered the judge in Cochise County to restart the civil lawsuit, allowing the victims to make arguments that the confession was not privileged. I love that they used the church's own handbook against them. Now let's go to Oregon, where in 2016, an Oregon teenager went to see her longtime family doctor, David Farley, for a physical before her missionary trip. Like the doctor, the teenager was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He allegedly convinced her that a penetrative exam was necessary at such an appointment, a line he frequently used even when evaluating elementary school-aged patients for a sports physical. 8 years later, the teenager, now in her 20s, saw on social media that Farley had been accused of SAing his patients by masking his actions as legitimate medical care. She is now one of more than 170 of Farley's former patients suing him and the hospitals and clinic he worked at. Her story, detailed in the lawsuit, is echoed in the stories of other girls who grew up in the conservative LDS Church. These patients say in the filing that they received little, if any, sexual education and did not know what to expect at their appointment or what kind of conduct to watch out for. Many met Farley through the Wilsonville ward of the LDS Church, where he was a stake high counselor, or were introduced to him by other friends at the church. As not only a respected leader within the church, but a doctor with a degree from Harvard University, Farley seemed inherently trustworthy. Though widespread allegations of SA against Farley first came to light 5 years ago, the church has not had to answer for the part it allegedly played until now. Legacy Meridian Park Hospital, one of the medical institutions where Farley practiced and allegedly abused patients, is attempting to subpoena records from the LDS Church. Those records could shed light on what church leaders knew or should have known about the alleged abuse. In response, the church has filed a motion for a protective order, hoping to prevent any disclosure of documents. Along with Farley, Legacy is one of the defendants in a nearly billion-dollar lawsuit. In its court motion to compel the church to produce documents related to Farley, Legacy asserts that recent deposition testimony from the doctor's former patients indicates the church was at least partly aware of the abuse. Multiple plaintiffs have testified in depositions that the church potentially knew or should have known of Farley's wrongdoing and may share culpability in the abuse they suffered, Legacy's attorneys wrote in the filing. Legacy served the church with an amended subpoena in 2025. That subpoena specifically sought records related to Farley's membership, discipline, and church privileges, as well as medical services he may have provided to members of the church, his volunteer work with kids camps, and activities and complaints made about him by by other church members. The church withheld most of the requested documents. In a response to legacy filed with the court, attorneys for the church argued that Oregon courts do not have authority over documents stored in Utah, where the church is headquartered. Attorneys for the church also posit that turning over the requested materials would violate clergy privilege, which is codified in Oregon law. Courtney Tom, one of the attorneys for the plaintiffs, said without the church's records, it's impossible to tell just how many of its leaders knew of Farley's abuse. However, Farley appears to have deliberately placed himself in roles that gave him direct and trusted access to minors. Tom said in a written statement to OPB, every institution that enabled Farley's abuse, whether through silence, negligence, or misplaced trust, must be held accountable for failing to protect victims. According to court filings, the church allegedly granted Farley special access to girls at the church, like having him volunteer as a camp doctor for girls' camp through the church. The Mormon church is a breeding ground for predators. Victims are often set up to fail because of lack of education. As a kid, I was taught to read my scriptures and say my prayers, but I wasn't told that I was going to have a period. I was also taught that I could trust priesthood holders. If I had ended up in Farley's office, I would not have known that what he was doing to me was wrong. And the church's response, withholding documents and seeking protective orders, is a classic institutional self-preservation mechanism. This behavior prioritizes the protection of the Mormon Church's reputation and internal secrets over the psychological need for justice and validation of the victims. If the church really cared about victims like it claims it does, it would release the documents, take accountability, and change the internal policies and preaching that gave David Farley and so many others the safety they needed to securely abuse. And last up today, let's finish with this great quote that says, "To be called woke in a world that sleeps through suffering is no insult." And that's your update for today, folks. I absolutely hope you have the day that you deserve.